The music was soft, almost too soft, drowned beneath the clinking of glasses and the artificial cheer that filled the banquet hall. I sat near the back, close enough to see the faces of my son's guests, but far enough away that most of them pretended not to notice me. That suited me. For most of my life, I had learned to take comfort in the shadows. Kevin, my son, my blood, stood at the head of the room, tuxedo pressed, glass in hand, his new bride Vanessa clutching his arm like a trophy she had just claimed. The spotlight above them cast a golden sheen over their smiles, the kind of glow you only see in magazines. "First," Kevin said, raising his champagne, "I want to thank everyone who made tonight possible. Vanessa and I feel truly blessed." There were nods, murmurs, polite applause. I smiled faintly, almost proud, until he continued. "And then," he added, his voice sharpening with that mocking edge I'd come to know too well, "we should all take a moment to thank my father for being here. It's not easy to show up when you don't really have anything to give, but at least he came." A ripple of laughter traveled across the hall. Some of the guests shifted uncomfortably. Others looked at me with thinly veiled pity. Vanessa hid a smirk behind her glass. My throat tightened, but I said nothing. I simply lowered my eyes to the table, tracing the rim of my water glass with one finger. Kevin wasn't done. "Growing up, I used to dream about the kind of man I'd become," he said, puffing his chest. "And I realized something. You can't become successful if you follow in the footsteps of someone who never achieved much. My father worked hard, sure, but let's face it, he was never more than ordinary. Tonight, I thank him for teaching me one important lesson: that I had to be different." The applause that followed was hesitant, awkward. Still, it was applause. Inside, my chest burned. Anger, shame, and grief churned in silence while I kept my face steady. People only saw the old man with thinning silver hair, wearing the same navy suit he had owned for years. They didn't know the truth. Because the truth was, I could have bought this entire hotel tonight if I wanted to. But Kevin didn't know that. Not yet. The microphone squealed, drawing nervous laughter. Kevin grinned, wrapping his arm around Vanessa, and raised his glass again. "To my father," he said, "for showing me what not to become." The crowd echoed, "To his father." Crystal clinked. I raised my own glass slowly, though it held nothing but water. The reflection of the chandeliers trembled in its surface, as though even the glass itself felt the sting of humiliation. I lifted it anyway, swallowing the bitterness that coated my tongue. My hands didn't shake. They never do when I decide something. And in that moment, something inside me shifted, subtle but permanent. I looked at Kevin, his sharp smile, the arrogance in his eyes, the way he looked at Vanessa as though the world already belonged to them. He believed I was nothing. He believed the man who raised him, who worked himself ragged to put him through college, who held him when his mother died, was worthless. He believed wrong. I lowered the glass and let the corner of my lips curl into the faintest of smiles, not a smile of pride, not of love, but of certainty. "You'll see," I whispered into my glass. No one heard me. Not Kevin, not Vanessa, not the guests who had already forgotten my presence. But the words hung there, heavier than the chandeliers above us. Because in that moment, I decided, Kevin would learn what it meant to underestimate me, and he would regret every word of that toast. He didn't know the truth I had kept hidden for decades, and tonight, I decided he would find out. The wedding ended hours ago, but the sting of Kevin's words clung to me like smoke after a fire. I sat alone in my small bedroom, the one place in the world that still felt untouched by his arrogance. The suit jacket I'd worn was draped over the chair, its sleeves wrinkled from the long night. My tie hung loose around my neck, but I hadn't bothered to take it off. I was too numb to care. The silence of the house pressed down on me. Clara's picture stared back from the dresser, her smile forever frozen in that photograph we had taken on our 30th anniversary. I traced the frame with my thumb, as though her warmth might seep through. "You would have been ashamed of him," I whispered. For a moment I let myself break. The tears I had held back during the reception finally spilled, quiet and hot, rolling down the lines time had carved into my face. No applause, no laughter, no cruel eyes here. Just me, the shadows, and the echo of a son's betrayal. I thought about all the sacrifices I had made for Kevin. Selling the plot of land I inherited from my parents so he could attend one of the best business schools. Working overtime shifts at the firm so he'd never miss a school trip. Enduring nights of back pain, paperwork, exhaustion, just to see him succeed. And yet tonight, he reduced my entire life into a joke. I closed my eyes, and Clara's voice came back to me, gentle, steady. "Michael, don't let bitterness rot you from the inside. Choose your battles wisely." But Clara wasn't here anymore, and Kevin had crossed a line I could no longer ignore. I rose from the bed and walked to the old oak chest at the foot. With a deep breath, I opened it. Inside were the things nobody else knew about. Folders, envelopes, keys, my real life, hidden beneath the mask of an ordinary man. I pulled out a leather binder and opened it on the desk. Pages of investment records gleamed beneath the lamplight. Stocks, bonds, real estate, silent shares in companies that had thrived for years. And tucked inside a separate folder, bank statements, numbers that stretched into millions. I smiled bitterly. Broke, Kevin had called me. If only he knew. For nearly 15 years since Clara's passing, I had built and guarded this fortune, quietly, strategically, deliberately. I never flaunted it because I wanted to see who Kevin would become without the promise of inheritance dangling over his head. Now I had my answer. My phone buzzed, breaking the stillness. A message from Kevin. I opened it. "Thanks for showing up tonight, Dad. Try not to embarrass me next time." The audacity of it made my jaw tighten. Embarrass him? I who had given him everything? I typed nothing in reply. Instead, I slipped the phone into my drawer and closed it with finality. He had no idea what storm he had just unleashed. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. The pain in my chest was still there, yes, but now it mingled with something sharper, colder. Resolve. Kevin thought I was powerless, but the truth was, I held every card. He believed I had nothing, but I had more than enough to destroy the shallow empire he worshipped. And I would. I wiped the last tear from my cheek and let my hand rest on Clara's photograph once more. "Forgive me," I murmured. "But this is the battle I choose." The night stretched on, quiet and heavy, but my mind was alive, turning, planning, weaving. By dawn, my decision was made. Kevin would learn that the father he mocked as worthless was the one man capable of shattering his pride. I had kept my fortune hidden for decades. Now it was time to use it, not to save my son, but to teach him a lesson he would never forget. Morning light spilled through the curtains, soft and golden, but I barely noticed. I had been awake most of the night, my mind wandering through years of memories, choices, and secrets. The papers from the oak chest still lay scattered across my desk. I sat before them now, the inked numbers staring back at me like old friends. Most fathers carried pictures of their children in their wallets. I carried account statements, investment portfolios, deeds to properties scattered across the country. Kevin believed I had nothing. But here it was, everything he never knew. When Clara passed, grief nearly consumed me. Yet in that grief, I found a strange kind of clarity. I realized how fragile security was, how quickly life could tear away the little we cling to. So I made a choice. I tightened every dollar, cut back on unnecessary comforts, and quietly invested what she left behind. Stocks others dismissed, I studied. Land others called worthless, I purchased. I sold my pride to build something stronger for the future. And year after year, the numbers grew, silent and unnoticed. I chuckled bitterly. If Kevin had bothered to look past his own reflection, he might have seen the truth. I picked up one deed in particular, an old beachfront property in Florida. When I bought it, people laughed at me, said the town was dying, said it was a waste. Now developers had been offering double, triple its worth. I never sold. Not because of greed, but because it reminded me of Clara, of summers spent by the sea. A knock broke my thoughts. I turned, surprised. Kevin rarely visited unannounced. I opened the door to find him standing there, sunglasses perched on his head, his smile too rehearsed to be real. "Morning, Dad," he said, stepping inside without waiting for permission. "Rough night?" I offered no answer, only gestured toward the kitchen. He followed, making himself at home. As I brayed, "We'd coffee." Kevin leaned against the counter, his voice casual. "Vanessa and I were talking. You've got this big old house, just you rattling around in it. Doesn't it get lonely?" I felt my jaw tighten. "It's the house your mother and I built together. Lonely or not, it's mine." Kevin chuckled, sipping from the mug I handed him. "Of course, Dad, of course, I just mean, you could downsize, you know? A smaller place, less maintenance, maybe even a retirement community. People your age—" "People my age," I interrupted, "still know how to hold a hammer and write a check." He raised his hands in mock surrender. "Hey, I'm just thinking about what's best for you. And let's be honest, this place has value. If you sold, you'd have a nice cushion. It'd make sense." I looked at him carefully, measuring his words. He thought he was clever, planting the seed. But I saw it for what it was, greed wrapped in fake concern. Kevin smirked, mistaking my silence for agreement. "I mean, let's face it, Dad. You don't really need all this space anymore. Why not cash in while you can?" I forced a thin smile. "I'll think about it." His grin widened, satisfied. He patted my shoulder as if I were the child. "Good. Just looking out for you, old man." When he finally left, the air felt cleaner, freer. I walked back to my study and closed the door, locking it behind me. Kevin thought I was blind, thought I didn't notice the hunger in his eyes, the way he spoke of my home as though it already belonged to him. But the truth sat right here, in folders and safes he couldn't touch. I rested my hand on the stack of documents, my pulse steady. For years I had hidden this fortune to test him, to see if he would rise on his own, prove himself worthy of the legacy. Instead, he chose greed, arrogance, cruelty. And now? Now, this fortune wasn't his safety net. It would be the rope I used to pull the grow and out from under him. Kevin already dreamed of selling my home, of pocketing what he thought was mine, but soon he'd learn that nothing he wanted would ever fall into his hands. The night air was cool, but inside my chest, a storm raged. I left the hotel banquet hall, my son's mocking voice still echoing in my ears. His words, "worthless old man," had struck deeper than I let anyone see. I walked toward the parking lot slowly, the sound of clinking glasses and laughter fading behind me. I thought I was alone, until a low voice stopped me. "Sir." I turned. A man in a dark uniform stepped out from the shadow of a pillar. He was tall, wearing the simple black suit of hotel security, and his eyes held a seriousness that made me pause. "You don't know me," he said quietly, "but I know you, and I know your son." I frowned, my hand tightening around the keys in my pocket. "What do you mean?" He glanced around before leaning closer. His tone dropped to a whisper. "During the rehearsal dinner, I saw something. Your son, he didn't just invite you to insult you. He's planning something. Something that could ruin you permanently. A chill ran down my spine. Ruin me? He already thinks I'm ruined. The man shook his head firmly. No. He wants to take more. Your reputation. Your freedom. He hesitated. Even your life, if it comes to that. I stared at him, my breath catching. That's absurd. He's my son. The guard's expression didn't soften. Blood means nothing to some people once money's involved. He reached into his pocket and pressed a folded slip of paper into my hand. You'll want to see this before it's too late. I opened it, just enough to glimpse what looked like names, dates, and a bank account number. My pulse quickened. Why are you telling me this? I demanded. Because I've seen men like him before, the guard replied. Arrogant, hungry, dangerous, and I don't want to stand by and watch an honest man walk into a trap. For a long moment, I could only hear the sound of my own heartbeat. Then, faintly, the laughter from inside reached us again, the laughter of my son entertaining his guests, completely unaware that his carefully laid schemes had just sprung their first leak. I folded the paper, slid it into my jacket pocket, and looked the guard straight in the eye. Thank you. You've done more for me in 5 minutes than my own flesh and blood has in years. The man nodded once. Be careful. This is just the beginning. I walked away with a heaviness in my steps, but also with a strange, burning clarity. My son's insult at the wedding had been a wound. This warning, however, it was fuel. As I drove home, one thought kept repeating in my mind. If he wants a war, then I'll give him one. The slip of paper in my jacket pocket felt heavier than lead. As I drove home that night, I couldn't stop replaying the guard's warning. Reputation. Freedom. Even your life. The words gnawed at me. My son hadn't just humiliated me publicly. He was preparing something far worse. When I arrived home, I didn't pour a drink or sit by the fire as I usually did after long nights. Instead, I cleared my desk, switched on the lamp, and unfolded the paper. 3 names, 2 dates, 1 bank account number. The names meant nothing to me at first, strangers on a page, but the dates, they coincided with key business decisions I'd made years ago. Deals that had ended suddenly. Partnerships that had collapsed without explanation. My hands trembled slightly. Could he have been digging through my past? I reached for my laptop, my fingers moving faster than they had in years. I typed in the account number. It didn't take long for me to realize the truth. The account was active, but not in my name. It belonged to a trust, one I had set up decades ago for my son. A cold chill swept over me. It wasn't just a trust. It was my trust. The hidden fortune no one knew about. And somehow, my son had found it. Clever, I muttered bitterly, pushing my chair back. But not clever enough. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. My son wasn't simply planning to expose me. He was building a case to take what was mine, to paint me as a fraud, perhaps even a criminal, so he could stand tall as the man who had uncovered the truth. But he had underestimated me. I wasn't some frail old man waiting quietly for the end. I had built empires, lost them, rebuilt them again. I had survived betrayals far greater than his. And if he wanted to play games, then I would remind him. I invented them. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Over breakfast, I drafted a list of allies, old business associates, trusted friends, even former rivals who owed me favors, people my son didn't know or thought I had long forgotten. By noon, I was on the phone. My voice, calm but edged with steel, surprised even me. John, it's been a while. I need a quiet meeting. Off the books. Tonight. I made 5 calls like that. Each one ended with the same promise: discretion, loyalty, results. By evening, the plan had begun to take shape. I sat back in my chair, staring at the city lights beyond my window. My son thought he was setting the board, placing his pawns where he pleased. He thought he had the upper hand. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that I had already begun moving my own pieces into place. The game had begun. And this time, the father would not play to lose. While I was busy gathering my allies, across town my son sat in a private lounge with a drink in his hand and a smirk that hadn't left his face since the wedding. He believed he had already won. "Do you know what the old man did last night?" he sneered to the 2 men seated across from him. They weren't friends. No, my son had very few of those. They were associates. Hungry, ambitious men who saw my son as a rising star worth attaching themselves to. One of them leaned forward. "He left early. Looked humiliated. Perfect. Exactly as you wanted." My son chuckled, swirling his glass. "Exactly. You should have seen his face. He's too proud to admit he's broke, but soon, pride won't matter. I'll make sure his entire reputation crumbles before he even realizes what's happening." The second man, more cautious, spoke carefully. "And the account? Are you sure you can access it without raising suspicion?" My son's eyes gleamed with arrogance. "Of course. I've been patient. Years of quiet digging, finding the right strings to pull." He thought he was clever hiding that fortune under another name. But I've got the documents, the contacts, the evidence. Once I expose him as a fraud, embezzling, concealing funds, whatever story we frame, it won't just strip him of money. It will destroy him socially. The men exchanged glances, impressed but wary. "That's risky. He's still your father." My son's smirk hardened into something cold. "Father? He's nothing but a stepping stone. He built his empire fine, but I'll take it further. And to do that, the old man has to disappear. People don't make room for the next king unless the old one falls." He lifted his glass in a mock toast, the same gesture he'd made at the wedding. "To the end of an era." The others clinked their glasses, though hesitation lingered in their eyes. They were ambitious, yes, but even they could see the poison in his ambition. Meanwhile, as my son sowed seeds of betrayal, I was already laying the groundwork to cut off his roots before they took hold. Neither of us knew just how soon our 2 games would collide. For now, the board was set. The pieces were moving, and in this game, betrayal was the opening move. I had always believed that time tempered a man's face, softening it with years of laughter and hardship. But now, as I studied my reflection in the long mirror of my study, I realized that age had given me a different kind of gift, the ability to wear a mask. On the surface, I was calm, an aging father, perhaps wounded by his son's public insult but too dignified to let it show. My neighbors and acquaintances saw a man retreating politely into silence, choosing dignity over confrontation. That was the role I wanted them to see. But inside I was seething. The words from his wedding still burned in my ears. My father. Broke. Worthless. Irrelevant. He had said it with laughter, with charm, with the cruelty of someone who believed the crowd belonged to him. And worse, I now knew it was not just arrogance. It was a strategy. My son wasn't merely cruel, he was scheming. I had received my first whisper of proof earlier that afternoon. A friend from the bank, an old golfing companion named Richard, called me, his voice taut. "John, forgive me if this oversteps, but has Michael been inquiring about your private trusts?" The question hit me like a stone to the chest. I forced my voice into a steady hum. "What do you mean?" "He's clever about it, not directly under his name. But we saw unusual document requests from a firm tied to his wife's family. You might want to look closer, off the record, of course." I thanked him, ended the call, and sat in silence for nearly an hour. My suspicions were no longer shadows. They were flesh and blood. My son wasn't simply ashamed of me. He was reaching for the very fortune I had spent decades building. So, I decided the mask would remain. At dinner that evening, I smiled faintly as Michael and his new bride, Lauren, joined me at the table. The clink of silverware, the hum of conversation, it all sounded ordinary, domestic, warm. I leaned back, hands folded loosely. "The wedding was beautiful," I said lightly. "You both must be exhausted." Lauren beamed, her perfectly rehearsed politeness on full display. "It was everything we dreamed of, John, and we're just so glad everyone came together to celebrate." Michael raised his glass with that same smirk he wore at the altar. "It was memorable, wasn't it?" I matched his smirk with a soft smile, though my chest burned. "Memorable, yes." Inside, my thoughts were sharp, calculating. You want to play the king? Then let me be the ghost in the castle walls, silent, unseen, until the moment I strike. That night, when they left, I closed the door and let the mask slip. My face hardened, jaw tight. The seeds of betrayal had sprouted, and I was done waiting for them to grow. Tomorrow, I would water my own seeds. But tonight, as I sat in the quiet study, a single sound reached me through the window. Hushed voices outside. My son's voice, low and hurried, speaking to someone I couldn't yet see. I froze, leaning closer to the glass. The mask wasn't just for my son anymore. It was for everyone. And as I listened, I realized the betrayal stretched further than I imagined. The night after overhearing Michael's hushed voice through my study window, I barely slept. His words had been too fragmented to grasp fully. Mentions of documents, leverage, soon. But the tone was unmistakable. My son was plotting something far larger than I had feared. By morning, my mask was back in place. I carried myself with quiet dignity, nodding to neighbors, pretending to read the paper at the cafe. But inside, the storm raged. I knew I couldn't fight this battle alone. That afternoon, as I lingered over my coffee, a familiar figure slid into the seat across from me. Richard, my old golfing partner, the banker who had first warned me. His eyes were serious, his usually jovial manner replaced with something firmer. "John," he said quietly, leaning forward. "I thought more about our conversation. There's more I need to tell you." I set my cup down, my pulse steadying. "Go on." He lowered his voice. "Michael isn't working alone. He's using Lauren's family connections. They've got a lawyer who's been sniffing around your trust accounts for weeks. And, John, forgive me, but they're not just asking questions. They're fabricating things. Fraudulent papers. It looks like they're building a case to paint you as unstable, or worse, as though you've been hiding money illegally." A chill spread through me, though outwardly I only gave a faint nod. "So they plan to ruin me in the public eye before they ever touch a cent." Richard's jaw tightened. "Exactly. Once your reputation is destroyed, your fortune won't matter. You'll be defenseless." For a long moment I studied him. Then I asked the only question that mattered. "Why are you telling me this? Loyalty to an old friend, or something else?" His eyes didn't waver. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything to betrayal. Years ago, my own brother stole my business out from under me. I swore I'd never let a knot. Her man faced that kind of ambush if I could stop it. And John..." He leaned even closer, voice dropping to a whisper. "You have more power than you realize. If you're willing to fight, I'll help you, quietly. But you must act before they make their move." His words pierced through the fog of anger and despair that had followed me since the wedding. For the first time, I felt the faintest spark of clarity. "I've already begun," I said evenly, though my heart thundered in my chest. Richard allowed himself the smallest smile. "Good. Then let's make sure Michael has no idea what's coming." We sat in silence for a moment, two men bound by betrayal, united in purpose. I had found my ally. But even allies come with shadows, and I would soon discover that Richard's past carried secrets of its own. Richard and I met again the next evening in my study. The heavy curtains were drawn, the only light coming from the brass desk lamp that cast long shadows across the room. It felt less like a home and more like a war council chamber. On the desk between us lay a stack of documents Richard had discreetly pulled from the bank. He tapped them with a steady finger. "These are copies of account activity. Nothing's missing yet. But see this?" I leaned closer. A set of requests, formal-looking, stamped with the seal of a law firm. Lauren's family's law firm. "They're using legal back channels," Richard explained. "Fishing for a loophole to declare you unfit to manage your assets. Once that motion is filed, control of your accounts could be temporarily frozen. Guess who they'll argue should manage them instead?" My jaw clenched. "Michael." Richard nodded grimly. I sat back in the chair, feeling the weight of it all. My son wasn't just reckless, he was strategic. He wanted me paralyzed, stripped of authority, painted as irrelevant before the world. But he underestimated me. "I won't let him strike first," I murmured. "If he thinks he's setting me up for a fall, he has no idea I've already built the trap he'll walk into." Richard studied me carefully. "What's your plan?" I gave him a thin smile. "To let him believe he's winning. To let him get just close enough to the prize that he forgets to look at the ground beneath his feet." For the next hour, we sketched out the opening moves of my counterattack. I would begin moving select assets, not enough to raise alarm, but enough to place them where Michael's lawyers could never touch them. Meanwhile, Richard would feed me updates on every attempt Michael made to pressure the bank. But strategy alone wasn't enough. I needed more. Evidence. Proof that Michael and Lauren were orchestrating the fraud. Something undeniable I could open eyes when the time came. As if on cue, Richard leaned forward, lowering his voice. "There may be a way. One of Lauren's cousins works at that firm. If I can get him talking carelessly over drinks, I might be able to slip something out of him. But John, it'll be dangerous. If Michael suspects you're aware, he'll accelerate his plan." I nodded slowly. "Then let him. The faster he moves, the sooner he steps where I want him to." Still, as Richard left that night, I sat in the study alone, staring at the flickering lamplight on the wood. My son was ruthless, but I had been forged in fire long before he ever dreamed of power. The game was no longer defensive. Tomorrow, I would take the first step to draw him out. The morning of the reveal began like any other. Sunlight cut through the blinds of my study, painting pale stripes across the floor, but I felt none of its warmth. My hands rested on the arm of my chair, steady, though my heart pulsed with the weight of what I was about to do. For weeks, I had worn the mask of silence. I had smiled when Michael mocked me, nodded when Lauren pretended at sweetness, and listened patiently while they plotted to strip me bare. But tonight, the mask would slip. Richard arrived just after noon, carrying a slim folder. His expression was taut, his eyes sharp with purpose. "John," he said as he laid the folder on my desk, "we have them. Documents. Communications between Michael and the firm. Enough to prove conspiracy and intent." I opened the folder. Inside were printouts of emails and falsified financial statements, signed off by a junior associate connected to Lauren's family. Michael's name was not on the papers, but the language, the timing, and the coordination painted the picture clearly. My throat tightened, not with sorrow but with a cold kind of clarity. So it's true. He wasn't just preparing to take from me, he was building the gallows for my name. Richard nodded. If these are shown to the right people, Michael's reputation is finished. He won't just lose your fortune. He'll lose everything he's trying to build. I closed the folder, exhaling slowly. Then it's time he sees what he's awakened. That evening, I invited Michael and Lauren to dinner. The air at the table was thick with false civility. Lauren smiled too sweetly. Michael smirked as if the house already belonged to him. Over dessert, I placed the folder on the table. Michael raised an eyebrow. "What's this, old man? Your will?" I let a thin smile cross my lips. "Something like that. Go on, open it." He flipped through the pages, his confident smirk faltering, then vanishing altogether as his eyes darted from line to line. Lauren leaned over his shoulder, her face draining of color. I leaned back, watching them squirm. "Interesting, isn't it? Seeing your schemes on paper, almost as though someone was watching." Michael slammed the folder shut. "You don't know what you're talking about." "On the contrary," I replied, my voice steady as steel. "I know exactly what you're doing, and now so will others. Lawyers, investors, friends, the very people whose approval you crave." For the first time, I saw real fear flicker in his eyes. But as he tried to recover, he leaned forward, his voice a low hiss. "You think this scares me? You think a few papers will stop me?" I studied him calmly. "Not stop you. Expose you. And exposure, Michael, is a kind of death you can't come back from." The table went silent. Lauren shifted uneasily, her hand gripping Michael's arm. But he only glared at me, his mask slipping into something feral. And in that moment, I knew the war was far from over. I had revealed my hand, but in doing so I had awakened a darker side of my son, one that wouldn't back down, not even when cornered. The ballroom had grown suffocatingly quiet. Every glittering chandelier, every polished wine glass, every guest in their finest attire seemed frozen in that single, unforgettable moment. Daniel's voice still echoed, his words venomous, cutting deeper than any blade. "My father is worthless." For a heartbeat, Robert couldn't move. His son's words didn't merely humiliate him. They ripped open every scar of sacrifice, every late night he had worked when Daniel was still a boy asleep upstairs, every dream he had tucked away so his children could have more than he ever did. But as quickly as the sting came, it was gone, replaced by something else. Clarity. He drew a slow breath, lifted his head, and smoothed the lapels of his modest suit. The suit wasn't Armani, but Robert wore it like armor. He forced a small smile as he stepped forward, his shoes clicking softly against the marble floor. "Worthless?" Robert repeated, his voice steady, carrying easily in the silence. "Is that truly what you see when you look at me, Daniel?" The younger man didn't flinch. "You've never had money, never built anything important. You hide behind stories of hard work, but look at us now. This wedding isn't your gift. It's Elizabeth's family's. You've contributed nothing." A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd. Even Elizabeth's father shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his eyes darting between father and son. Robert allowed the silence to linger before replying, his gaze fixed firmly on Daniel. "You've confused wealth with worth, son. I stayed silent when you mocked me at dinner tables, when you dismissed my advice, when you paraded others' approval in front of me. But tonight you've crossed a line." His tone was calm, but the authority beneath it was unshakable. Across the hall, Anna pressed a trembling hand to her lips. She had known her brother could be cruel, but this was public execution in front of every guest who mattered. Her eyes burned with shame for him, and pride for her father's composure. Daniel smirked, mistaking Robert's restraint for weakness. "What line? The truth hurts, doesn't it? Maybe now you'll realize you should have worked harder, or smarter, or something. You were never cut out for greatness." Gasps slipped from the crowd. Some of Daniel's friends chuckled uncomfortably, but most faces had hardened. The air smelled of roses and champagne, yet the moment reeked of arrogance and betrayal. Robert stepped closer, the years of fatherhood weighing on his shoulders, but also giving him strength. His voice lowered, almost tender. "Son, there are many things in this world you can earn back. Money, property, titles. But respect, once it's gone, it leaves a hollow space no fortune can fill. Tonight, you've revealed far more about yourself than about me." The words struck harder than Daniel expected. His smirk faltered. Robert glanced around the hall, his voice rising again. "To all of you here, let me ask, what defines a man's worth? Is it the weight of his wallet or the weight of his integrity? Is it the shine of his suit or the strength of his word?" The crowd leaned in. People who moments ago had been sipping champagne now watched as if history itself were unfolding before them. Elizabeth's father cleared his throat, uncomfortable. Her mother's lips thinned. A few of Daniel's groomsmen exchanged uneasy glances, and in that charged silence, Anna spoke softly but clearly. "Father, you've never been worthless. You've always been priceless." The words sliced through Daniel's arrogance like a blade. His face reddened, his fists clenching at his sides. Robert looked at his daughter with gratitude before turning back to his son. "You measure me by dollars and cents, Daniel. That is your mistake. But tonight, I will measure you, not by your words, but by your actions." The ballroom held its breath. Robert's eyes gleamed, calm but dangerous, as though a storm waited behind them. Daniel swallowed, suddenly unsure, and then Robert straightened his back, his voice carrying with finality. "Tonight, everyone will see which of us is truly worthless, and which of us is priceless." The room stirred. A wave of anticipation rippled through the guests. Whatever was about to come, they knew. It would not be ordinary. The tension hung like a knife above Daniel's head. Robert had just turned the tables. The man everyone dismissed as meek now stood commanding the attention of every soul in the room. And as the chandeliers sparkled, a truth became clear. Robert was no longer hiding. He had worn his mask long enough. The ballroom no longer glittered with the joy of celebration. Instead, it stood heavy, silent, its chandeliers casting fractured light across faces frozen in disbelief. Moments ago, Robert's carefully guarded truth had erupted like fire into the open. His hidden fortune, his years of quiet planning, his decision to expose his son's arrogance before all who mattered. Now, only the ashes remained. Daniel stood pale, his hands trembling at his sides. The man who had mocked his father's worth was suddenly stripped of his own. His bride, Elizabeth, had pulled her hand from his arm, her eyes hard with betrayal. "You lied to me," she whispered, loud enough for all to hear. "You said he was nothing, that marrying you was marrying up." Her parents exchanged dark glances. In that instant, the alliance they thought they had secured crumbled. The wealthy, worthless father had proven himself a giant, while their son-in-law-to-be looked smaller than ever. Daniel tried to stammer a reply. I didn't know. He never said." Robert's calm voice cut through his excuses. "A man's ignorance is no shield, Daniel. You chose pride over humility, greed over gratitude. You were given a chance to honor your family, and you spat on it." Gasps and whispers rippled across the hall. Some guests avoided Daniel's eyes altogether, already drifting toward Robert as though gravity itself had shifted. Anna stepped forward, her face glowing with quiet triumph. She took her father's arm, standing firmly beside him. For the first time that evening, Robert didn't feel alone. "You carried the weight of us all, Father," she said softly. And tonight, you carried it higher than he ever could. The crowd erupted into quiet nods, murmurs of approval, even light applause. Not for wealth, not for show, for dignity. Daniel's composure shattered. He slammed his fist onto the table, knocking over a glass. "This isn't fair. None of this. You—" His voice cracked. "You should have told me." Robert's gaze never wavered. "If I had, son, would it have changed the man you became? Or would you simply have worn a different mask, one of obedience until you thought it safe to betray?" The question landed like a hammer. Daniel had no answer. His face crumbled under the weight of his own reflection. Elizabeth, pale with shame, turned away from him. "This marriage is over." Her voice was flat, final. She gathered her gown and walked out, her parents following quickly behind. The sound of her heels on the marble echoed like a gavel striking judgment. Silence lingered. And then, as if the spell had broken, guests began to leave in clusters, some shaking Robert's hand, others casting Daniel cold, dismissive glances. The once lavish wedding dissolved into whispers and retreating footsteps. Robert exhaled slowly. The storm had passed, but its wreckage lay all around him. He looked at Daniel, standing alone amidst toppled glasses and abandoned plates, his tuxedo rumpled, his pride in ruins. For a fleeting moment, Robert's heart ached. No matter what had transpired, this was still his son. But then he remembered the words, sharp as knives. "My father is worthless." Perhaps some ashes were never meant to rise again. Robert turned to Anna. She squeezed his hand. "It's over, Father." He nodded, though his eyes lingered on Daniel. "No, Anna. It's only the beginning." His words were not cruel, only resolute. He had reclaimed his dignity, but what lay ahead would test whether his family could ever be rebuilt, or if the fire he had ignited tonight had consumed more than pride. The ballroom doors closed behind them with a heavy thud, leaving Daniel in the ruins of his own making. And so, from the ashes of betrayal, a new story began, of justice, of rebuilding, and of the scars left by a son's arrogance and a father's revenge.